is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. China's premier tries to allay fears on China's growth, saying Beijing is on track, despite Western economies de-risking their supply chains. Our other headlines, the United Nations accuses Russia of illegally detaining more than 800 civilians since the start of the conflict in Ukraine and executing 77 of them. Vladimir Putin tells his security chiefs they have prevented civil war amid signs that the head of the Wagner Group has arrived in Belarus. And what's the real score when it comes to racism, sexism and elitism? The damning report on English cricket. China's premier has criticised the West's de-risking drive, saying the push to limit trade and business ties with his country is a false proposition. Li Qiang made his comments during his keynote address to international business leaders at the World Economic Forum in Tianjin, a meeting called the Summer Davos. This comes against a backdrop of disappointing economic data from China this year, as slowing trade and struggling property sectors take their toll. But the premier said the country's economy is picking up steam and is on track to meet its annual target of 5%. The Economic Forum is attended by about 1,500 public and private leaders from all around the world. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Lily Liu, who's there for us. Lily, what are the key messages then from the premier's speech?
Yes, Jamie, the Premier's speech this morning emphasized on 4 topics mainly. First of all, he put an emphasis on communication and exchange, urging countries to bridge differences and enhance consensus. And secondly, he talked about solidarity and cooperation, where he said the pandemic has taught us that no country can be spared or solve all problems alone, so unity is the only way to go. And thirdly, openness and globalization. The Premier denounced the de-risking strategy to reduce dependence, calling countries to turn to the track of win-win cooperation. And finally, the Premier said that peace and stability should be cherished and serve as what is enabling condition for future development. And I interviewed a number of participants today at the forum. They say they found those messages from the Premier Li extremely powerful, both in terms of the direction that he expressed for the future development of world affairs and also for the role that China would like to play in enabling these positive developments. And they believe that this message will resonate in many countries across the world. Jamie?
Lily, this isn't just an economic gathering. Diplomacy is also on the agenda, isn't it?
You're right, Jamie. 4 leaders attended the Summer Davos in Tianjin. They are the prime ministers of Barbados, Mongolia, New Zealand, and Vietnam. And New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has met with Chinese President Xi Jinping today, which is a milestone moment of his week-long trade mission to China. During the meeting, President Xi said that he appreciated the importance that Hipkins placed on the relationship with China and that he himself attached great importance to this relationship. The president said that the 2 sides should work together to kickstart a new 50 years of bilateral relations and promote steady and sustained progress in their comprehensive strategic partnership. And prior to this, Hipkins attended a major session at the Davos Forum today, discussing how to brave economic headwinds and rewire growth with several top economic and political leaders, after which he visited a local supermarket here in Tianjin, where he checked out many products imported from New Zealand there. When asked by CGTN how confident he is about exporting more products to China, he said he certainly hopes to deliver more high-quality products to Chinese consumers. And also, when he tasted a kiwi in the supermarket, he said it tastes just as good as in home. And just to give you an update, the Chinese president has also met with the prime ministers leaders of Barbados, Mongolia and Vietnam in Beijing today. Back to you, Jamie.
Lily, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Lily Liu. Well, CGTN's correspondent Wang Guan spoke to the Director General of the World Trade Organization, who says China has an important role to play as the world moves beyond the pandemic.
Well, I think it's really critical that this is taking place in China. As you know, China is the second largest economy in the world, a driver of global growth. So having a gathering like this with key business people, key policymakers and politicians at a time of heightened global tension, I think is a very good thing, because we can all listen to what China is trying to do. One, for its economy to recover and keep driving the global growth, keep contributing. Two, how is China feeling about these tensions and how can we cooperate better globally? Because we cannot solve the world's problems unless the two big economies, the two big powers get along.
Exactly. How do you see the role of China in this post-pandemic world, especially in terms of helping with global trade and global growth? And in particularly, how do you see China's role within this multilateral trading system?
Well, China is probably one of the poster children for the success of the multilateral trading system. Since it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, China has done phenomenally well. Its per capita income has increased over 12 times. It's now the largest exporter in the world, is the second largest importer. So on all counts, China has done extremely well, and as everyone says, it's critical to the world economy. So what happens to China is of consequence not only to people in China, but to everyone around the world.
Russia has illegally detained more than 800 civilians since the start of the conflict in Ukraine and executed 77 of them. That's according to the United Nations, based on interviews and visits to detention centres. Their report also found violations of international law by Ukrainian troops, but on a smaller scale. The UN Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine says children and the elderly were among those held in arbitrary detention, and that it found widespread evidence of torture and mistreatment. Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says his troops made advances in all sectors after the Wagner Group's aborted march on Moscow at the weekend. Meeting his troops in the east and the south of the country, Zelensky said Monday had been a happy day for Ukraine's counter-offensive against Russian forces. Meanwhile, Russia says it destroyed artillery depots in Ukraine in overnight strikes. The Defense Ministry in Moscow says it targeted Western-supplied weapons in the Donetsk region. Well, Russia's president is meeting military chiefs after the aborted revolt by the mercenary Wagner Group. Vladimir Putin is said to be holding one-to-one meetings with some of Russia's most senior army and defense figures after an apparent deal ended Wagner's uprising. Admitting that Russian pilots were killed in the clashes with Wagner militia, Putin has also praised security forces in Moscow for preventing what he calls civil war. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, just talk us through what Putin has been saying altogether.
Well, indeed, a number of events has been held by the Russian president throughout the day, and he was using quite strong language, saying that the Russian law enforcement agencies, the Russian military, have managed to avert the civil war. He was also saying that there were patriots in the ranks of the Wagner mercenary group, and they would now be able to join the regular Russian army, suggesting that they have been misled by the organizers of this armed rebellion. The Russian president has also been saying that the Russian people and the Russian army have not supported the mutineers, and announced a minute of silence for those pilots that have been killed as a result of the Wagner activities. We also understand that in a meeting with the Russian security forces, Russian president thanked them for preventing these chaos in Russia. But also the Russian president has insisted that the backbone of the leadership at Russia's Ministry of Defense should be formed from those who have participated in the course of the so-called special military operation operation in Ukraine. But in the meantime, we've heard also some very interesting facts about Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Russia's Wagner mercenary group, from Vladimir Putin. Let's listen in.
Support for the entire Wagner Group was fully provided by the state. From the Defence Ministry, from the state budget, we fully funded this group. From May 2022 to May 2023 alone, the state paid Wagner $1 billion for maintenance and incentive payments. At the same time, the owner of the Concord company, Yevgeny Prigozhin, through the Vontog chain of army stores, despite the fact that the state shouldered the funding of Wagner, in a year earned just under $1 billion from the state by supplying food and providing food services to the army.
Dasha, the news agencies in Belarus are reporting that Wagner's leader, Prigozhin, has now arrived in the country.
Well, that's right. We have heard Belta news agency from Belarus saying that Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, has confirmed that the Wagner head Yevgeny Prigozhin is now in Belarus. Now, we understand that this is part of the deal that has been brokered by the Belarusian leader, so that the Wagner head is going to exile to Belarus for what he calls was the march of justice towards the Russian capital. Now, Alexander Lukashenko himself has been talking a lot today, very openly. He said that his country has a lot to learn from the experience of the Wagner fighters, and also when confirming the information that Wagner head is now in Belarus, he said that his troops can station in Belarus for some time, but they will not be supported by the Belarusian state financially. And also he stressed that the fighters of the Wagner mercenary group will not be involved into the protection of the Russian tactical nuclear weapons that have been stationed and will be further increased on the territory of Belarus.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshyova in Moscow. Well, for countries on Russia's western border, there was a real fear that the turmoil in Russia could spill over. Our correspondent Peter Oliver went to the Estonian city of Narva, home to what was once one of the busiest crossings into the EU from Russia.
You can choose your friends, but not your neighbours. For the people of Narva in Estonia, perhaps never a truer word was said over this last weekend as they watched on as Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner Group first marched on Moscow and then pulled back.
It's what it is. The people at the top over there fighting amongst one another, as long as we don't end up caught up in it.
The fact is, we are Russian citizens living here in Estonia. We're worried that if there are any problems, they could send us across the other side of the river, to Russia.
We understand what type of guy Prigozhin is, but the fact that he had intentions to take down Putin, we were inspired. We had hope, because the entire world is suffering.
It's around a 2.5-hour drive in that direction to St. Petersburg, Russia's northern capital, and the HQ of the Wagner Group. Now, the bridge just behind me was one of the busiest crossings between the EU and Russia. Now, most Russians are banned from entering the European Union, while those going the other way into Russia face a lot of extra security and around a 6-hour waiting time. Narva's 15th century castle, built by the Teutonic Knights, is one of a number of tourist attractions that used to bring visitors to the city. Hotel manager Vladimir told me how people here were gripped by the news on Saturday.
Fear because this was all happening so close. Hope because we all thought that perhaps this will bring about some change. We were all just waiting and watching, but we didn't really know what for.
Tourism is feeling the pinch from Russia and across the EU.
The politics has a huge impact on our business. We feel it here more than most. We feel like hostages of the situation. The Russians who would come here are banned. The Europeans who would come here are too afraid because we are so close to the border.
Narva is Estonia's third largest city with just under 54,000 people. It has strong links to its giant neighbour to the east. 87% of the population of this city are ethnic Russians, and Russian is the predominant language spoken. People are somewhat relaxed when it comes to any security risk, though. Estonia is an EU member state and also part of NATO. However, the impact of the Ukraine conflict and last weekend's events are certainly being felt here. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Narva, Estonia.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, racism, sexism and elitism. That's the lineup in English cricket, hit for 6 in a damning new report.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. China's premier tries to allay fears on China's growth, saying Beijing is on track, despite Western economies de-risking their supply chains. Our other headlines, the United Nations accuses Russia of illegally detaining more than 800 civilians since the start of the war in Ukraine and executing 77 of them. And Vladimir Putin tells his security chiefs they have prevented civil war as the head of the Wagner Group arrives in Belarus. Discrimination is widespread in English and Welsh cricket. The damning conclusion of a new report, a 2-year investigation, found what it described as structural and institutional racism, with half of all the respondents saying they've experienced racial discrimination in the last 5 years, 3/4 of whom did not report it at the time. It found that women are marginalised, experience sexism, and are treated as subordinate at all levels. Only 12% of senior leadership roles are occupied by women, and professional female cricketers earn just 1/5 of what the male players earn. Well, the report also showed elitism continues to exist in the game. Nearly 60% of England's male players in 2021 were privately educated, compared to just 7% in the wider population. Well, the chair of the English Cricket Board, Richard Thompson, has offered an unreserved apology and said the sport would reset cricket. Azim Rafiq is a former Yorkshire cricketer who suffered racial discrimination during his time at the club. Robin Dwyer spoke to him about this report.
I think from my own experience, it's not something that surprises me. There were a couple of things that stood out to me, which were actually not my experience or not something I was aware of. Like England women have not played a test match at Lord's, which I think was quite shocking for me. But I think apart from that, it's something I've lived and talked about over the last few years.
And the report outlined prejudice against many different groups in cricket, didn't it? Racism, sexism, elitism. How systemic are the issues?
Yeah, I think the report says that they're pretty entrenched. They're not just a few bad apples or a few bad comments. This entrenched in the structures of the game. The link between private schools and the county talent pathway. The cost barriers. The pay structures for women, amongst the stuff that I've talked about around race. I think the stats are 87% of Pakistani and Bangladeshi people feel like they've been discriminated in cricket. 82% Indian people feel like they've been discriminated in cricket, and 75% black people. You know, these are big numbers. This is, you know, entrenched in the game from grassroots right to the top. And even to this day, you know, I've seen in some places that there's a bit of a denial or a bit of a attempt to downplay people's experience from, you know, from likes of Michael Atherton, and, you know, that's really upsetting and sad.
So do you think this report goes far enough? It's called for an apology from England and Wales cricket, but would you like to see more than that?
Yeah, look, I think the first recommendation is an apology, and, you know, the least they can do is apologise for what they've put everyone through. So, you know, I'm a bit uncomfortable about giving them praise for apologising, although I do know, you know, people do find it difficult to apologise. So that's just a start, but it's what happens from here. That's the most important thing, and, you know, I like that they're going to take time, they're going to take stock, and, you know, hopefully, you know, put together a strategy and the people that are going to play a part in that strategy to make sure that cricket becomes a place for everyone.
As for cricket, you said sport's broken. Can it be fixed?
Yeah, look, I'm a glass half full. You know, we live in hope. Only done it because, you know, there's got to be hope. I think it's going to require a lot of hard work. It's going to require people coming together. But, you know, live glass half full, and I want cricket to be, you know, the game that it should be. It's a game I still love. You know, it's a game that's, you know, it's been my life, and I want my kids to experience the same thing, but without the abuse.
A record-breaking heatwave in Mexico is making life harder for migrants who are trying to get to the border with the United States. Many shelters say they're at capacity, leaving some people with no choice but to stay in hot and cramped tents. Our correspondent Alistair Baverstock reports.
After 2 months of tough overland travel, Antonio Pinedo, a US-bound migrant from Venezuela, is nearly there. He's just arrived in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, across the border from El Paso, Texas. But given the current weather, this final stop on his long journey north may be the hardest.
The current heat wave we're living through is terrible. There's a water shortage, we get dehydrated, and that gives you headaches and makes you vomit. And the sunburn, my lips are totally burned.
A record-breaking heatwave here is now entering its 3rd week. Temperatures on this section of the US-Mexico border are forecast to rise this week as high as 43 degrees Celsius, a scorching 108 Fahrenheit. And with the migrant shelters of Ciudad Juarez filled past capacity, makeshift tents provided by the local government are providing life-saving shade for the most vulnerable. But even inside a tent, the midday heat is unbearable. Junior Vasquez has been at the border for 6 months. He says the past few weeks have been the worst of his stay.
Inside the tent, it's like an oven, and we're all inside melting like butter. You can't sleep, you can't do anything. We're like zombies. Not even in the hottest part of Venezuela do we get heat like this.
However, migrants like Junior must risk going out into the heat to provide for their families.
We go out to work, to earn money to eat. But I've nearly fainted being outside in this heat. My body clams up, I get shivers, I can't walk. You have to find a bit of shade to rest under because you feel you're going to faint.
James Young is the director of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees field office in Ciudad Juarez and says the changing global climate is only going to make migration more challenging.
Divided into 2 immediate factors. One is displacement itself. You know, there are more and more natural disasters that are causing displacement. But the second is that it's harder and harder to make a safe journey and arrive safely and integrate safely because you are exposed to the elements.
Despite the extreme weather, migrants continue to arrive here in this desert border region. They say overall conditions are worse in the countries they are fleeing. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Ciudad Juarez, Mexico.
Indonesia is making the fight against climate change a touch cooler. The country is adopting so-called cool roofs to combat heat waves and try to reduce energy costs. Our correspondent Sulkina Ahluwalia reports.
Indonesia continues to deal with escalating temperatures. In West Java's capital, Bandung, Beta Paramita has found a sustainable solution. Be Cool Indonesia is part of the global Cool Roofs project, an organization that aims to make these rising temperatures more bearable. Be Cool's product is simple yet effective, a water-based primer and coating that reflect sunlight and reduce the amount of heat absorbed by a building.
The coating of this plant helps to lower indoor temperatures, but this is a bonus. Our target is to reduce global warming, so our focus is on microclimate, which means we put emphasis on the outdoor. We're conscious of the material of the buildings. In Indonesia, some buildings are built with metals, like a container, and that can get very hot.
Beta says in Indonesia, air conditioning is a luxury. Only select commercial buildings in big cities can afford them. As a result, schools in the small villages are left to deal with the sweltering heat, and this is something Beta wanted to change.
During the hot season, the surface of this building can reach as high as 50 degrees Celsius. But with the coating indoors, it remains much cooler, and it can decrease the temperature up to 32.5 degrees Celsius.
This initiative is in line with Indonesia's efforts to go green and to eventually become a low-carbon country in the coming years.
Indonesia also has a commitment, which was signed by President Joko Widodo, to reduce carbon by at least 70% by 2060. This mainly includes innovation in architecture and the transportation industry. To achieve this goal, we need teamwork between various government officials.
As the world warms, innovative and sustainable solutions like Be Cool offer a glimmer of hope, making the future a bit cooler, one roof at a time. Sulkina Ahluwalia, CGTN, Bandung.
The headlines again. China's premier tries to allay fears on China's growth, saying Beijing is on track, despite Western economies de-risking their supply chains. Our other headlines, the United Nations accuses Russia of illegally detaining more than 800 civilians since the start of the war in Ukraine and executing 77 of them. And Vladimir Putin tells his security chiefs they have prevented civil war as the head of the Wagner Group arrives in Belarus. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Welcome to weather forecast over to Europe. We're going to have a wide range of light rainfall, mostly across majority of the continent on Wednesday and Thursday. Especially on Wednesday, you could see if you're living in the border areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland, there'll be a chance of torrential. And moving to much of France, all the way down to Iberian Peninsula, clear sky being a forecast. Getting to Thursday, you could see rainfall will continue to take place, except for parts of Germany, where clearing conditions been a forecast. In terms of temperature fluctuation, Wednesday, you can see warming up for much of France all the way down to Iberian Peninsula. But notice on Thursday, the upper level low trough will usher in some cooler air heading for Western Europe, daily high speed sliding. And your business and travel outlook Thursday, we're going to have 23 for the highs in Copenhagen with overnight rain, and upper 20s for folks in Stockholm, Helsinki, 26 down to Minsk with a chance of light rainfall. 21 will be the daily highs in Moscow. Back to Western Europe Thursday, light rain in London, 23, moderate rainfall in the city of Paris, 26. See shine at 40 degrees in Madrid, clear sky, and around 10 degrees cooler to be expected in the city of Lisbon with clear sky. And that's it for now. Stay tuned for more city forecast.